So on the show today, it's episode 200, and we're doing what we did for episode 100, where I've taken questions from the Facebook group, and interviewing today is my friend Neil. So Neil I've known for a few years. He's a mate. He's done the Embodied Facilitator course. He's Aikido black belt, various other talents, corporate training all around Europe, doing some interesting things. And he's heroically stepped in because the original interviewer had a ruptured appendix, very rude of her. So he's stepped in to do the 200th episode. So I'd like to say Neil, welcome, but really it's you saying Mark, welcome, I guess.
And welcome to your own podcast.
Nice to be on my show.
Number 200. That must give you some pride.
Yeah, it's phenomenal, really. Like I'm just chatty, and I do a couple a week, more or less, on average. I don't mind talking. I spent half my morning talking to various people and started to realize that a lot of those conversations could be recorded and would be interesting to other people. And it just seems to have built up. So I don't quite know how 200 is happening. I guess I'm known for having a fairly ridiculous kind of output rate for things. Though for me, as I said, it's just pretty straightforward. It's just chatting to people.
When you look back and reflect on the body of work, because I think we can call that now a body of work, which ones stand out for you?
Well, different ones for different reasons. So there were some that were just really fun, like sort of matey ones, like Stephen Kotev or Keith Martin-Smith, just sort of bloke friends I hadn't caught up with in a while. But in terms of special ones, some of them went sort of deeper than expected and were quite touching. I mean, the one with Ken Wilber was very touching. And the one where I introduced Paul Linden and Shinzen Young, I think that one was particularly special. It was just something about seeing two masters meet and being responsible for that and witness to that, which is a bit different. Like, to interview one masters, I wouldn't say it's become blasé to me, but I've sort of got used to talking to really high caliber, interesting people on a nearly daily basis. But to introduce two of them and they got on really well, that was a bit different, that one. And I'm very happy to see it's sort of one of the most popular ones now.
What are your goals for going forward with the podcast? What do you want to do? I know you've got 100. How many countries is it in now?
I don't know. I mean, we've had pretty much almost every country on the planet in terms of listenership. I try and get a spread of where people are from. It's easy to get a lot of Americans and a lot of English. So I've tried to spread out into Europe and in other countries as wherever I travel, I'll ask people and get introduced to people. In terms of goals, as long as I'm learning and providing something of value for people, that's fine. I mean, I'm going to be having these conversations anyway, right? Like I had 2-hour-long conversations with a friend and a colleague today, which were pretty in-depth and interesting, just because that's what I do. I tend to learn out loud. It has become a great, marketing's almost too crude a word for it, but it's sort of a great relationship builder. Like I was just at the Buddhafield Festival and about 5 or 6 people came up to me and said, I either love the conference or I love the podcast. I guess what I'm doing though is also almost sort of mapping the field. Like it's such a huge field, embodiment, that just to map it, not to get any real depth of knowledge, but just to see what's out there, I think it's a kind of 5-year project. And this is one way that enables me to map it with more than just a Google search, but actually talking to people. And more, people will say, oh, have you heard of this person? Or you should have this person on. So it's a great way of seeing who's out there and meeting caliber trainers. And, some of them then end up at the conference or coming to Brighton to do workshops and going more in depth. So I'd say I enjoy 9 out of 10 of them. And I don't really hate the 1 out of 10, just sometimes it's a bit flat,
Okay. If you had advice to give to other people doing podcasts, what would it be?
Well, I think definitely do what I've done, outsource everything except the fun part, because like people, I'm not editing them, there's a team of people that are really helping out. So big love to Aggie and all the others who are helping out. So that's the sort of first practical thing. It's relatively easy to set up. I'd say it's if you like chatting to people, I've got no journalistic training, and I think that shows sometimes when I listen back to them. But if you like having conversations, then I feel like it's a really easy way to learn. It doesn't have to cost a huge amount of money. I mean, even with all the outsourcing, it probably costs me something like £50 per episode to make, which isn't a huge amount of money. I mean, it adds up over 200, right? And then there's other costs like hosting and things, but generally it's not hugely expensive. And and I can justify it from a sort of business point of view too. I find it's definitely builds a lot of trust with people. I mean, to the point that when I was traveling around New Zealand, for example, like 3 different listeners put me up in their houses and picked me up from airports and took me around town. And, you know, there's a sort of really kind of slightly weird one-sided intimacy it develops. So if listeners are out there and they meet me, I absolutely want to meet you in person, and please do say hello if you see me around. But it can feel a bit weird at first when someone knows everything about my life, because I tend to talk quite a lot in the episodes as well as interview, which has upset a few people. They're like, you should be just asking questions and shutting up. But I feel like a conversation involves 2 people, right? So that, and I've got a big mouth.
I'm going to ask you a question, because I was listening back to a couple of your podcasts. I'd like to circle. I'll come back to some other points I had there. But what's your embodied history? I heard you asking that to Diane Mitchell-Hamilton. I thought that was an interesting question.
Yeah, normally I start every episode with that because it just places people in terms of where they're coming from geographically, culturally, and practice base. I think there's on episode 100, I go more into that. And there's other episodes where I talk about my own background in Aikido particularly, and then that opening up into tango and 5 rhythms and a lot of yoga. But these days I sort of do everything. You know, at Buddhafield, I did 3 yoga classes, 1 embodied dance class with some people I've got coming on the show, actually, Jameson Lee. You know, I'll go to a comedy show. What else did I do at Buddhafield? Meditate, of course. Lots of saunas, you know. So this is sort of my life, just doing classes. And you know, I'm going Feldenkrais training starting in a couple of days, which is the start of a 4-year training. So I'm constantly on different kinds of training. I'm most interested in body work right now. I just had a great Rosen method body work session. I've been interested in Feldenkrais for a while. So sort of having done the more athletic things or speedy things, coming to the more sort of gentle hands-on work is probably my own kind of leading edge with training.
That's your learning edge now. That's your leading edge there.
Yeah, I mean, aside from sort of being a leader for EFC in the conference, I mean, that is a massive learning and often quite full on and intense and not always easy. It just came out of the Embodied Facilitator course module, as you know, and that, you know, being a leader in that as opposed to just a teacher. The teaching bit's the easy part, the facilitating. So that's a big learning edge. I've got to learn. There's various topics as a learning edge. Like I've just started a period of celibacy for the first time, and you know, it's day 6 in the big testicle household, Neil. So that's really interesting. Just going right for 40 days up to my 40th birthday. I'm not going to have any kind of sexual activity, and I'm a fairly sexual guy normally, in subtle or less subtle ways. So that, you know, it's just really interesting to be. I noticed, God, some of this is quite personal. First of all, loads of energy. I mean, I was down the gym today, just absolutely hammering the weight. I'm scared how much I'm going to get done in the next 40 days. Occasional periods. I mean, you know, it's only 6 days in, so it's not. We're not. And I've been in monasteries for 25 days, and you know, this isn't the first time. But yeah, I think there's subtle changes to interactions. And I think it's also seeing, and I had the same thing when I've done quite a few fasts with food, and it's the same principle of examining how I use something. So, for example, I use sex, I think, in quite a stress relieving way because I don't drink or do drugs, and I wonder how healthy that can be, and that can get into objectifying and less healthy things, and you know how subtle ways I relate to women differently. But definitely just looking at, I think it's a great way to look at your own relationship to anything is to stop doing that thing, whether that thing is the internet or food or, you know, whatever. So I kind of got a lot of insight into my relationship with food. So it's followed in that way, in some ways, of going, what do I rely upon here? What are the addictive elements? What are the healthy elements? What are the things, what are the needs that I'm mixing in with it? And you know, like touch or connection or whatever.
You're separating it out.
Yeah, I'm still just exploring that one. That's early days, though.
Okay. Was there anything in particular that prompted this? Because I thought it was really cool. When I read that status update, I thought that was really interesting that you want to explore that. Was there anything that prompted that?
Well, I think it's been long overdue, don't you, Neil? I mean,
yeah,
you know, I think I've had a few shots over the bowels, kind of thing. Is that the wrong analogy? In terms of, I think the world we live in is quite vulnerable, but the way the world has turned has changed things And also just in terms of my age, coming up to 40 felt like the right time. I'm no longer a kind of young buck. There's a way in which I'm coming into a more mature position as a leader. I've been working with my therapist a lot the last year on sort of moving more from a sort of warrior archetype to more of a king archetype. And I feel like, wanting to like fight and fuck everyone is very much like a young man's game. And there's something about, being married, being in a more mature leadership position, both for my own well-being and the well-being of all the people around me, I think is really important. And I think there's a generation of people before us who didn't take this stuff seriously and didn't do the therapy. And it's not just around sexuality, it's about money and it's around power and it's around so many other things. They didn't do the therapeutic work, which is often a missing piece for embodiment teachers. They didn't have enough accountability in their organizations. So, for example, on EFC, there's a voting committee of 5 people, 4 of which are women, by the way, and they outvoted me on an issue. I wanted to throw someone off the course, and they were like, "Nope, it's your stuff. It's not, it's not going to happen." And we talked about it, and I didn't get my way. And actually, that's great. It's great. I genuinely celebrate that I'm not a dictator at EFC, and there's structures and accountability. Like, if listeners listening to the episode with Roger Walsh, where we talk about ethics, then I think the structures and accountability, as well as the culture, as well as the therapy, as well as the personal practices of, whether it's abstinence or conscious relating or whatever, I think are really, really helpful. And I think I'm my own worst enemy and my own biggest liability. I have a huge lust for life, and that is my strength. But, I've got to be careful of that, in many domains. So I don't want people to, I don't really want to focus on this particular domain. It just happens to be the one that's right there, right now.
And so stepping from warrior into the king, how do you see that showing up in your life?
For me, there's a sort of seeing the bigger picture. There's a being in service to other things, like putting my own ego aside sometimes and go, what matters here is the work. Time frames get longer. Really, I'm always planning in sort of 3 to 5 to 10 year projects, just continuously. I feel people relate to me differently. I'm getting more sort of father figure projection as opposed to people angry because I remind them of their ex-boyfriend or something, So as a leader, there's different sort of projective problems and benefits. There's a way in which, one of the functions of the king archetype is to create order and to give blessing, right? So like they're the 2 main functions that I'm in, say, when I'm leading a conference or whatever. Yes, there's a certain amount of ordering without micromanaging or becoming a dictator. And there's also that function of sort of blessing the next generation. Like I have a whole group of mentees now, and that's quite a big part of my work. I'm talking to 2 of them today, and they're all 10 years younger than me, pretty much. And they ask my advice on things, and I can say, well, 10 years ago when I did this. So, I'm not an elder yet. I'm not in the sort of Paul Linden category. I talked to Paul today. I've got my own elders and mentors. Lynn Sedgmore will be another one that I was meeting in Glastonbury when I was there, and they're in a different category, but it's almost sort of 3 stages of life, and I can no longer deny I'm in the middle one.
What excites you about working with being a mentor to those?
Really getting change with people. Really seeing people develop. Because fucking workshops are just unsatisfying. Do 2 days with people, and they come and they go, and everyone has a nice time, and they say you're great, and nothing really changes. Yeah. And EFC obviously is a longer proposition, but both communities generally, like the EYP community, the EFC community, but also, those mentees, they all did EFC. So I've known them for at least a year, and they're now making a 2-year commitment to being mentee. So it's like, financial commitment, 4 times a year in Brighton, 1 call every month, other random things. Like I took one of them to a spa hotel recently. One of them comes from a very poor background, and she has a bit of a problem sort of owning status and money, and it's holding her back business wise. So it was raining at Butterfield one night. So the wife and I, obviously, she's like, "It's raining and cold, let's go." So we just went to a luxury spa hotel, and I took this student with me and got her to sort of ask stuff of the staff and sort of walk around like she owned the place, and it's just really fun. And I know her well, this person. I've known this, but you know who she is, I won't name her, but I've known her for a couple of years. And to be able to really know people's patterns and work with them and see them over time and help them get their, the business side is what they often need help with. I've become this like weird marketing guru despite having no training or particular skill in the area. Helping them get their businesses out and do their own thing. That's way more satisfying than just course where everyone jumps up and down and cries.
And there is crying, and there is jumping up and down.
There is crying and jumping up and down, but it's turning states to traits is the key thing, right? And then not just traits into externalities in the world.
Yeah, so speaking of that, Jane, and I could definitely relate to that, having been on EFC last year, and it being a much more in-depth and transformative program where it really affects you personally, professionally. You have to make changes. You cannot not change, in a sense. That's been going for 6 years now, is that right?
Yeah, we're in the 7th year actually in the UK, and the 5th year in Russia. And there's a pretty firm plan to expect to extend it to New York and Berlin in 2 years' time. So I'm currently training up the staff team for those locations. We may go to Scandinavia and Israel in the future as well, but for now it's there. And we're also launching a sort of mini online version of it for the first time next year, because we found those people that just couldn't afford it or couldn't get to it. And I started doing some online stuff, like I did a couple of online days, and they were really popular. And I went, hang on a minute, there's a whole load of people here who just can't, because the EFC because it's pretty high end, the expenses are ridiculous. It's like 60 grand's worth of expenses per course. So it's the only way I can make it work is to have it at a reasonably high price. And then I just realized that it's excluded a lot of people. And, my life's work is making embodiment accessible, and the podcast helps, but I realized people needed something a bit more structured. There was a proper learning program, not just like a shitload of interviews or a shitload of YouTube videos. So I think the online version is going to fill that gap. And we've also made an online version of the EYP teacher training that's going to be up in a few months. We did 5 days of filming. And so that feels like the future really, as well as these like in-depth, in-person programs, because there's no replacing that totally. But things like the conference and the online courses, the conference is going to be epically big next year. Like we think it may be the biggest thing there's been on the internet. Like we don't think there's been a bigger event on the internet as far as we can tell.
What are you aiming for in terms of numbers of teachers, in terms of
1,000 teachers?
Wow. Okay.
We've already secured some very big names that I'm really it's sort of just a who's who of embodiment. Just some ridiculously big names, but we're not, don't, like, people out there, stop fucking emailing me, okay? You can't get a teaching slot until next year. So at the moment it's like invitation only for the sort of top names.
That's what I was going to ask for.
Yeah, you'll probably get one, Neil. You're a great teacher, but you did well last year. But at the moment we're going to have a proper application process. There's going to be Daniela in charge of 10 Danielas. So there's 10 categories, each with 100 teachers in, running simultaneously, and then a sort of main room that won't be competitive. It will just be sort of 20 kind of very well-known teachers. And so we're hoping 1,000. What's that?
There's not actually going to be any sword fights between people.
No, we're not going to make people fight to the death for everyone's entertainment. Though that could be maybe the Russian version. We'll have that in. And we're expecting at least 100. We've got a solid plan for 150,000 people. And currently looking for sponsors and people to fund it, which is slightly terrifying. The budget, it's the biggest thing I've ever done. But yeah, I mean, last time we aimed for 3,000, ended up with 15,000. So God knows how many we'll end up with. And if we can get translation into, we're bullying Zoom into making a translation function. That means we'll be able to get it in Hindi and Portuguese and Russian and French and Spanish. Because a lot of people talk about accessibility or diversity, but the real hard barrier to most people learning is either they can't afford to come to courses or they just can't understand it. You've worked in Ukraine, right? And how many people over 30 speak solid English? So that's not their fault. It's just education. So we realize language is a huge barrier. So we're trying to solve that with a simultaneous translation kind of plugin.
So you're the creator of EFC, you're the creator of EYP, the On Embodiment Conference. What drives you to keep building new stuff?
Well, I haven't died yet, and I haven't fulfilled my life purpose yet. So when everybody in the world knows what embodiment is and has access to all this content on it, and it's just normal and boring in the same way as you'd Google anything, then I'll be done and that'll be fine. And what I've realized is there's necessity for breadth and depth. And I feel like with EFC and the mentoring, that's the depth, and the conference and the podcast is the breadth. So, and books I'm trying to put out and stuff like that. But I mean, part of it's just that I like challenges. I like new things. They're interesting. And like we did the conference, we thought we could just do it again. And it'll be another maybe 20,000. I was like, no. We're not going to do that. We're going to put a zero on the end of everything. So part of it is just I like challenge. Part of it is also it's pretty late in the day, you know, in terms of some of the big challenges out there. And I don't really get why you would want to play it small when we have access to what we have access to and the internal and external resources are there. You know, it's all, you just need a laptop and fucking the ability to self-regulate, really. It's all there. And I don't know why other people don't do what I do, really.
So that it confuses you. Other people don't have that sort of drive.
Well, why would you, if you love something, why would you not? I mean, that is also just personality based, I think, as well. But it's all there, isn't it? You know, there's just so much you can do with the internet and with fairly limited resources. You don't have to inherit £1 million to start a business these days.
I got a bunch of questions that we haven't.
Great, there's some great questions. I saw some of them.
So I'm gonna start.
Ping, let's go quick fire.
What do you do when you doubt your own capacity to excel?
I don't have much of an inner critic compared to most people, which is a bit of a flaw in other ways. But there are days I feel down on myself, or I look at a really good embodiment trainer and think, I could never be at that standard.
What do you do to bring yourself back up then if you're having a down day?
What helps you? My wife is very, very helpful. I mean, just having someone that you live with who believes in you is, I think, a huge gift to anyone. What do? I mean, I just go back to the mat and I practice and I get on with. I don't think I don't have to believe that I'm going to excel to just get on with it. It's just like buying milk from the shop. Just get on with it.
Yeah, FDI. How did embodiment help you during a long-term relationship or the transition after?
Long-term relationship. So I think I probably told the story before, but when my wife was getting denied her visas to come to the UK, that was really painful. And I think if I hadn't had that sort of self-resourcing abilities of centering and state regulation and various other practices of letting go and despair and various, embodied yoga and various other things, I think it would have been a much more painful process, and it was pretty bad. So I think like there's one. And, being able to give a good eulogy at my father's funeral because I was able to kind of hold my shit together for long enough, that's a gift, right? That's the end of a long-term relationship of another kind. And just in terms of intimacy, I think if I hadn't done the trauma work, the embodied trauma work that I've done, my chances of being like genuinely intimate with any human being would be very small.
What does peace mean for you personally, and what do you need, do, etc., to feel peaceful?
It's interesting because I've often not felt peaceful in myself. I mean, my name Mark means warlike, so it's interesting because of not having that in myself so much. I've really looked for it. And I think that's one thing that's driven me to different practices and meditations. And, there are people I feel peaceful around and places in nature I feel peaceful. I go to the park most days to feel more peaceful. My wife, again, gets all the credit. And I was talking to Paul Linden today about his embodied peace building work in Gaza that he's doing online. And there's possibilities there through the embodied work. But I don't know if I'm qualified to talk about peace.
Okay. I know that you worked with military in Africa before.
Africa, I've worked with people in Afghanistan, in Ukraine, Sierra Leone, Ethiopia, slums of Brazil, a few other places I can't talk about. So, yeah, fairly heavily, though not as much as some people. I mean, all these were fairly small jobs, to be fair. I was never like in the military or doing years of work.
Was there any commonality or something that you noticed about when you're working with those groups?
I mean, any groups that have been on the sharp edge of life, whether they be humanitarian aid workers or military or police or anyone like that, I think there's a certain realness. I was in a tent full of addicts and alcoholics the other day. They also have a certain realness that you wouldn't find at the rest of the Buddhist festival. There's often a lot of trauma, of course. So, working with that and an appreciation for life and death. Yeah, I mean, I like working with soldiers generally. I find they turn up on time and they work hard and they're respectful and they're easy to work with. They're much easier than hippies.
Yeah, I know, that's great. What gives you hope for the future?
Because I've got a lot of hope for the future. I think things are getting better generally. I'm of that camp.
Okay.
I think it's becoming, in my own little world, embodiment's becoming more normal, even though the word is, hashtag embodiment is trending in some fairly ridiculous ways. That's just the sort of slight absurdity of a positivity, which is that this work is becoming more normal, easier to speak about. My niece has got self-regulation classes in her school for her ADHD, and I think it's just really positive how much this stuff's spreading and how open it is. So there's just in my own little world, that's the obvious one. And I mean, on every front, I just see things getting better and better. I think at the moment everyone's obsessed with it's a crisis and it's the end of the world and it's this and it's that. And people need to chill the fuck out and look at the big picture.
How would you, if addressing those fears and concerns, though, how would you say embodiment helps?
Yeah, I mean, there's the self-regulation and the trauma work, so that if you do the trauma work, you're reacting to what is actually happening rather than this like mad perception and projection on top of that from the past. I think is a key piece, self-regulation, so that it's, I'm able to come to things resourced and say, well, this is a challenge and how are we going to deal with it rather than catastrophizing it. Being able to connect, I think, is an embodied capacity. And we see this divisiveness in the world now across different groups, and it's just in the States this year, and it's even worse there, but I see it everywhere. This othering of them and us and left and right and all the different things. And, just having a sense of humor as well. Trump's hilarious. I think it's important people see the funny side in things. So
what about the rise of Extinction Rebellion?
I've got some students involved in that. It's tricky. I don't know. They were at the Buddhafield Festival. They were well represented. On the one hand, I love the sort of passion of young people and putting forward stuff with the environment. I think both words say a lot. I'm not utterly convinced we're going to be extinct. That seems to be part of this fight, flight, reactive world of be afraid. I've got the right telling me to be afraid of immigrants and the left telling me to be afraid of the environment. Sort of everybody's telling me to be afraid, and I've learned over the years not to trust that too much, even if action does need to be taken. I'm not an expert on the science, so I'd probably better not comment there. I've certainly heard different sides, shall we say. Even this is a relative consensus, but not as much as is sometimes presented. And I think the rebellion thing's interesting because it's a little teenage. It's a little teenage, isn't it? That notion. So as I come more into my own maturity and as a habitual rebel, I have a lot of love for rebels, Irish background and rebel by nature and rebel with various causes. But there's something in that rebellion word that I go, something in that. I don't want to piss people off either because there's a lot of really good stuff out there. And I've got students who I know are smart and well-hearted who are doing this stuff. And maybe it's just not my generation's fight. So we'll see.
Leading on to that, a question about change. How does change happen? How do we change?
Oh, that's a horrible question, Neil. Why don't you answer it? You know about this. How does change happen, Neil?
Difficulty. And over long periods of time, you need support.
There we go. So practice, community, not just state changes. Yes, having strong experiences and insights, but backing that up with long-term practice and community engagement is the short answer, right? But we could talk about that for hours, that one.
Okay. How many crystals do you own?
Well, I did actually buy a 6-year-old a crystal 2 days ago. I was looking after Vidyadasa's 6-year-old while he was teaching yoga as my mate and colleague. And, we were at a festival. We just went and did trampolining and bought ice cream. And then I bought her a crystal. And, if you're 6, that's totally fine to believe in the magic powers of crystals. I highly encourage it.
The next question was top 3 positive qualities of dolphins and or unicorns.
Dolphins and or unicorns. Dolphins, they go well with chips. I did a unicorn horn masturbation exercise in EFC, which is always a winner. So they're good for that. And obviously the unicorn is the representation of the repressed masculine re-emerging in the new age feminized world. So I think they show the deep desire for the new age to reclaim its masculinity. It's a phallic object on a phallic object. So that's my unicorn theory.
What is it that makes you, react to those like crystals, dolphins, unicorns? What is it that?
Well, I'm less reactive than I was, around this stuff. I do see the beauty in it. I do see a desire for magic and enchantment, which is very beautiful, and the mystical, which is very beautiful. And I'm what Wilbur called the pre-trans fallacy. I think is really important here. That to take pre-rational thought and concepts and to elevate them as post-rational when they're actually pre-rational is a mistake. And that mistake is so endemic in my field that I feel like someone needs to be a voice of rationality and sanity. But, also I have a deeply mystical side. And, I was in the Goddess Temple in Glastonbury recently, quite enjoying it. So, I feel like there's also a lovely side to that. And there was a time when I was more trying to differentiate my own work from the New Age stuff, and people would confuse it with that. And that was a bit troubling. And these days, that's not the main confusion people have.
What's that? So a mystical experience in the Goddess Temple.
I loved it. I mean, it is what it is, and it's beautiful in its own way. And one of my mentors is a senior figure in the sort of goddess movement, but she also used to run government departments and coach prime ministers. So she's coming from that post-rational, having been successful, having understood logic and rigor point of view, rather than simply sort of childishness or people who want magic powers to feel special because they can't achieve anything through the normal means.
So it's a kind of balance, because I know you said, mentioned, can you tell me what the words to the national anthem are? What's your bank balance? And being able to juxtapose those being successful in the world, but still not quite of the world. Is that?
Yeah, well, I think it's like integrating in terms of, I refer listeners back to the episodes on spiral dynamics, like with Keith Martin Smith or Benser or Roger Walsh, and being able to integrate different parts of being human. So like with the mentees, we'll move between highly rational business models of marketing, and then we'll go into like a deep intuitive listening exercise or a creative dance exercise. And then we'll do some competitive work, which is often denied by certain people. And then something like Aikido, which has very firm boundaries and structure and rigor. And then, also being multicultural, but not, having the sort of flaws of postmodernism. So it's like being able to move between the kind of right from the archaic, mythic, through the traditionalist, not rejecting one's nationality or one's culture. I see so much self-hatred around one's own cultural background for so many people in the West, but equally being open to other points of view and other perspectives, being well-traveled, learning a language, being able to be good with money, being able to be fierce and to, defend your loved ones when you need to, being able to be sensitive and really listen when that is required. Like, how many people can really span the range of being human? And that is what I'm interested in.
Does that transcend and include?
Yeah, basic sort of integral stuff,
Okay, I've already asked that one. Learning edge at the moment, personally. Did we ask that? Learning edge at the moment, personal, professionally. You talked about that.
Yeah, I think I'm sort of re-looking at some of the sort of feminine side of things. Leadership, talking about that. Growing into bigger positions and how it is to sort of feel threatened within that or actually be attacked. I went through just fairly recently most of this year has been a fairly big psychological transition for me. So I did a couple of retreats at the beginning of the year. A very interesting combination of 2-week retreat, week off, and then 2-week retreat. And one of them I was very unwelcome at, and the other one was very welcome at, which I think was significant. I was doing a lot of body work at both of them. And basically just didn't come down from that post-retreat trippiness for a couple of months. So for a couple of months, I was essentially tripping. And that was tricky. It was fine if I didn't have anything to do. I was sort of feeling oceanically one with the universe. But when you've got to do your accounts, that's not necessarily the best state to be in. So 2 months of that was pretty challenging. At one point I was thinking, am I going crazy? Should I get antipsychotics? But I talked to some meditation teachers and they said you're sort of stabilizing the no self and impermanence as a ongoing experience. Sort of, it's a Buddhist lens on it. Developmental stage increase would be a developmental take on it. And then I had 2 months of just feeling anxious and depressed for no reason, which was really challenging, when I've got a lot to do. and to get up in the morning. And I was doing all the right things health-wise and psychologically, you know, relationship was good. But again, some of my Buddhist teachers said, okay, this is a particular stage you're going through. And this is what they don't tell you on the tin. If you start meditating, you know, sooner or later you will go fucking nuts. And this isn't a day off work. This might be a year off, or in my case, it was sort of 4 or 5 fairly difficult months. And the last month or two, I've sort of stabilized it, that I can sort of dip in and out of the sort of different mind states much easier. And my mood's elevated and the anxiety and depression's gone away. But I mean, those sort of fairly serious side effects of deep practice, you know, it's the culmination of 10 years of meditation, are pretty normal. And being able to differentiate what's pathology from what's growth, from what's just life circumstance orientated, that's not an easy matter. And, you know, luckily I have sort of world experts. I can kind of call Shinzen Young and Miles Kessler up to talk meditation, and then, you know, Diane Hamilton to talk about this. I mean, you know, one of the nice things about my position is I've got this kind of hugely resourced for advice.
So getting advice from the experts.
Yeah, being able to reach out to the right people, and most people take my calls these days as well, which is nice. You know, being a sort of person of some social influence in this field is definitely an advantage.
It's interesting you said both of them were through doing body work. You feel that's like a real access point for people to have those transformative experiences?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on the opinion that a fully integral practice you're going to get the best results if you're doing meditative work with shadow work, with body work, and there's various other factors. You know, like I also had a lot of stability of relationship and finances. So the conference kind of did pretty well for me financially. Plus I had some inheritance from my dad.
So you're able to lose your shit.
Yeah. Well, I think this is underrated in terms of sort of hierarchy of needs.
Yeah.
Like I feel like actually having your shit enough together that you can lose it is actually really, very helpful. And there's enough stability there. And, you know, my business did suffer during that period, but also there's a lot of other good people and considerate colleagues and, you know, just enough momentum of capability that things kept going until they were sorted. So
built up that support, you built up that network of connection to enable you, to allow you to go through.
Yeah, social capital, like people that would say, you know, I'd say to a colleague, hey, can you take this call for me? Because I'm all over the place. And they'd say, yeah, you know, did 3 for me the other month, you know, and having the resources, the connections, actual capital, social capital, all those things, I think can resource one to do some really deep work.
What's the weirdest embodiment exercise you've taught?
I mean, tickling God's testicles is a common one. That's pretty standard. I did a mass spooning the other day, Adam Wilder style, so that was pretty good. I mean, every time I teach 4 elements, I do something pretty ridiculous, don't I? Getting people to write their names with their asses. I don't know. I mean, I've done some really silly stuff over the years, like particularly if I'm trying to access that side of things.
Last time you were worried about it.
When was the what? Sorry.
Last time you were worried about it.
Oh, I don't worry about it. I filter my students hard. You know, people don't come to me unless they, I hope, you know, unless they kind of. Say again?
Corporate gig?
Yeah, I'm going to tone things down a bit for the corporate gigs, but it's amazing what you can do, you know, a corporate gig once you've got people's trust and just take a little bit longer to warm up. You know, once people are, I remember a thing I was doing with IKEA in Sweden, and we had 2 days, and after like half a day, I was going into some of my deepest content. They're just very open and, you know, willing to go there. And you know, we're in this like beautiful luxury place in the snowy wilds of Sweden. There was great containment. We were well looked after, and it took 2-3 hours to gain their trust and assert some authority as a teacher. But then they were totally open. So you can, you know, I've done shadow work, creative exercises, all sorts of things.
So the Swedes were actually okay.
Yeah, they were a pretty international group, to be fair. But yeah, Swedes are fine. Normally, I drop in a few fun jokes about, you know, gender essentialism in the yoga conference that goes down well. But it's easy to antagonize about certain issues in Sweden just because they're very politically correct. But generally, I have a very good time in Sweden. They're one of our 9th biggest audience for the podcast.
Going along with the corporate stuff, that somebody asked a question about, how do you secure high-ticket corporate gigs?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I've been teaching people that recently. I mean, in my history, some of it was SEO. I got onto I kind of gamed the Google thing before the big companies knew what was happening. And at one time I was ranking above London Business School for leadership training, which was fairly hilarious, with my little me on my laptop, and my cheap Marks and Spencer suit, that was like 10 years ago. And now I get a lot of stuff through referral, through the network that I have. Still some stuff for Google. I don't do as much as the corporate stuff as I used to, because I found I've sort of proven the point there, and I'm more interested in training coaches and yogis these days. But most of it's through referral. Like I was in Russia, and someone brought me into a company there because he's heard of someone from EFC or whatever.
What would you say to somebody though who was starting out, didn't have that connections, they didn't have the network?
Yeah. I mean, that's a whole marketing lesson, but you have to have credibility and connections. And if you don't have credibility, it can take a while to build it. And if you don't have connections, it's definitely longer. Though people sometimes have more connections than they think. They might just have a family member who knows someone in a company. And, there might be a boyfriend who does this or that. So it's often you just need that first job or two before you can start getting the referral kind of thing moving. So, and, I've cold called people as well. I got one of my most long-term clients just by cold calling companies in Brighton, and I just happened to get through to the right person on the right day. That's not comfortable. And I've also had work just from putting videos out on YouTube. I mean, you can have a social media way of looking at it, but it really depends. I'd say niching hard and looking at your sales funnel are the key things. I mean, I did a whole episode on embodied marketing, and really the answer is everything that's in that. Yeah, it's not always the way, and it's not always the best way. Like I've got one mentee, and she was wanting to do corporate, and then she decided A, she was too weird for it, B, she would never have credibility in it, and C, she really liked working with certain groups that she could get grants to work with. Like our friend Tess, she gets quite big grants, doesn't get badly paid to do cool projects if you know how to write a grant. So it's not the only way to get access to money.
So there's different ways. You don't always have to think about it in only one way. I must work with corporates. It might be much to think about. People who enjoy working.
The whole purpose black belt stuff? If people look up that series of videos, like who do you love working with, who are you drawn to work with? You can, for example, you could work with poorer people but still make a lot of money if you scale it, right? If you can sell 1,000 units of something for £5, you just had a good day's earning. Right. So, that's another way to do it. Or there's like the Robin Hood principle as well. But, it doesn't have to be. People's knee-jerk thing is business has money, I'm going to work in business. And it's not always the best fit for embodiment trainers.
What aspects of your own embodiment have you found most challenging to develop?
Listening. I'm still not a very good listener. That's embodied capacity. For a podcast host, it's kind of funny. It's one of my practices doing the podcast, actually, is trying to listen a bit more. Yeah, that's one. I mean, I'm a natural addict, so I get addictive around food or, anything. So, I mean, computer games, Facebook, whatever. Online, I think it's one of the hardest domains for anyone to stay sort of kindly aware. For me, that all of us, I'd say, is a challenge, but definitely seeing the difference between online behavior and real life behavior can be quite painful. And, I put some things in place to sort of stop some of the worst of that. People may have noticed I've got a lot nicer the last year. So, there's a few areas that I think I'm forgetting something, but they're the few that come up.
So, what exactly would that mean if you're engaging online? What kind of things help you remain kind and aware?
Taking regular breaks, reminding myself people are human beings, centering, re-engaging that sort of empathic side of things, pausing before pressing send on an email or a text. I mean, we've all made mistakes in texts and emails, and I feel it's because it's such a disembodied medium. I mean, even when I'm interviewing people, I'll often stand up and move around and just try and keep my body a little bit more engaged than numbing out on a computer.
Yeah, easy to do. We are not computers, as I always remind people. I think that's one of the challenges these days is where the environment creates that. The environment creates the thought even that we're like computers, and you talked about the Cartesian notion that mind body is a subset of information. It's bullshit, but the environment kind of inculcates?
Well, it's a shit metaphor for what we are, really. And I mean, the metaphor has always been the biggest technology there is. Like, it used to be a telephone exchange. They used to say the brain was like, before computers. And I feel like, the metaphors we use are not inconsequential, but the environment we're in, including the technological environment we're in, is way more powerful than people think. And, taking tech breaks and things like that are pretty helpful. I see very few people doing work with being embodied online. I see people saying, well, try not to use your phone, or take a break, a digital detox, or a digital sunset, and that's great. That's part of my own strategy as well, is to turn my phone off and have times of the day and, stuff where I go away and don't use my phone. It's kind of nice on EFC intensive to just not have the phone hardly at all for a week, But I think actually, how do we keep the embodiment online? The embodiment conference showed that was possible. It was a very embodied experience for me, even though it was, 2 weeks of being in front of a computer, like 12 to 16 hours a day. But that is possible. And I think that's the real lead edge, is not just how to take a break from technology, but how to be embodied online.
How to keep that kindness and awareness while still engaging with it.
Yeah, and I think of it in terms of it's just like the ultimate challenge. It's like you meditate with your eyes closed, and then, if you can do that, you can meditate with your eyes open, and then you can do yoga, and then you can do martial arts, and then you can do tantra, and then you can do comedy improv. Might reverse those two. It's a sort of scale of complexity, right?
Ladder of complexity.
Yeah. And, we're adding verbal, emotional, relational, elements. And right at the top of that, like, difficulty level, it's like the big boss at the end of the game, is Facebook, is texting your ex. So, this is like the ultimate challenge for embodiment people.
Improv and then Facebook. Okay. I remember you did, because on EFC we did, that's the first time I've ever experienced that, where we did a relational form of meditation. Really
important bridge, because people get real mindful on their own, and then as soon as they go into a conversation, it's fucked. It's just gone. So it's nice being on my episode. I can just swear as much as I actually like. This is so no, the relational meditation is really important. And actually, we've increased that element on EFC now. And every day we have what's called the coffee shop challenge, where people go into a shop or some other social interaction, and they're just aware of self and other. And it's like a daily thing they're asked to do as part of the course now. We've always had meditation, but we found there's a bit of a gap between meditation and coaching. Or for other people, it's meditation and life, right? Meditation and marriage. So that little the aware relational practices, I was in my first circling group recently. I almost got kicked out in Austin, Texas. But, there's other practices like circling, and Guy Senstock, who's the founder of Circling, is one of my coaches actually at the moment in terms of communication skills type stuff.
Tell me about circling. What's that involve?
Interpersonal meditation. I'm not an expert on it. People should listen to the John Thompson or the Guy Senstock episode. Basically paying attention in relationship. Okay.
So it's interesting. You seem to be talking a lot about transitions today. I mean, there's a transition moving from being the warrior into the king, moving from going to be 40 this year. There's a transitions from not separation between one activity and the other, but keeping a transition, keeping both and not either or.
I'm trans-ontological. It's don't say anything. Okay, so where were we? So I think life's always changed, right? Like, we do this seasons model on EFC, and like, if you don't understand change, you don't understand life. Like, change is the only constant, and it's a cliche, but that's when I see all these things like it's a this crisis, it's a that crisis. It's like, well, it's just change. There's always a crisis. We don't talk about the spring crisis or the autumn crisis. This is just change. Stuff grows, it fucks, it gets older, it dies. It's like that's just life. So I don't know. Yeah, maybe a little bit. There's a sort of I'm having like a midlife crisis, but not necessarily in a bad way. I always thought midlife would be like you hate your job and you hate your wife, right? But I love my job and I love my wife. So I didn't think I'd have a midlife crisis, but I am having a midlife transition. Yeah. I've got a Jewish mentor, and he's like, oh, you're old enough to learn Kabbalah now, and Jung wouldn't take students who are under 40. So we've done something quite crazy in letting these young kiddos, wild with all this technology we have, the psychotechnology. So, me and my best mate are having having a big 40th birthday bash, which will probably be about the time this comes out. And it'll be colourful. It'll be interesting.
Unicorns and crystals.
We may be seeing them. That's all I'm saying. They may be involved, but location will be undisclosed.
I guess there's a more general question again, another deep one. What matters to you most of all? What do you care about most deeply? And you can't
Fucking hell, Neil. Fucking hell. These questions. What cunt thought up these questions?
You're not allowed to say embodiment, by the way.
What do I don't know. Like, I can say love, but that's just a 4-letter cliche, isn't it? But it does come down to that. I unask your question.
Okay, it's your 80th birthday party.
Got it.
What do you want to have looked back on and say, what do you want to have done or experienced between then and your 40th?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'd like embodiment to be widespread and normal.
Right.
And, the idea of your grandchildren not understanding why you have a job, I think is a nice one. And just integrated fully into every aspect of society. And I'd like to feel like I'd been a small part of that movement, that wave. I've achieved some of my dreams already in terms of courses and things I put out there, and they're all just growing and maturing and developing. I'd love it if there was like a whole generation of teachers who I'd trained and they trained other teachers. I think I probably won't have children. Like most of my friends who are parents, they just look too miserable and tired. So I kind of feel like that's the nearest I'll get to the grandchildren, at that point, So there'll be young, 18-year-old yoga teachers on my knee, like as sort of, it's just getting too creepy and weird now. So we won't be able to release this episode. It's I've wasted all our time. No, but the idea of sort of embodied grandchildren, I think would be nice.
Okay, and then following on from that, how do you stay true to that vision or your vision and viewpoint in the face of those who try to shut you down by fair means or foul? Because I know you've had some problems.
Oh, Neil, have we had some fun? Yeah, how do I stay true to it? Well, at Buddhafield, there was a 5-to-1 ratio of strangers complimenting me to hating me.
Okay, so
ratio. That's
is that the regular ratio, or aren't you doing well enough if they're not half of you hate?
No, you know what? If it's I'm not immune to it, so just emotionally, like 5-to-1 is about as much as I can take. And when someone come up to me and would say, aren't you Mark Walsh? I'd sort of freeze and like, yes. And then normally they'd say, I love your podcast. Oh, thank you so much for the conference. And occasionally they'd have an opinion. And it's always people that have never really met me as well, which is sort of reassuring. Like most of the people, alienated a few colleagues and friends over the years, but most people are still talking to me.
What do you think are the myths about you?
The myths of Mark Walsh. Yeah, because like someone was saying, oh, I was just in this house and someone hated you there, but they'd never met you. And I'd say, well, what were they saying? So the main myths are I'm this sort of uber warrior of doom and I don't have feelings or get upset or am vulnerable at times. It's complete nonsense. It hurts. A lot of life hurts me as much as everyone else. And I don't wake up every day and sort of swing my foot-long dong and smash the world with it and kind of wake up and just stomp on the well. Most days I wake up and I'm sort of like, I need a coffee and I'm a bit late for the gym. And, that's one. I think another one is I'm some sort of awful misogynist or racist or homophobe, which is complete nonsense for anyone that's met me, and knows the actual work I do in the world with gay community, or I don't know, the fact that I surround myself with powerful women at work and they have genuine power over me, or the fact that I've worked in 30 countries and lived in 6, and there's no way I would do that if I was some sort of xenophobe. People from the EFC this year from Saudi Arabia and Japan and America and everywhere. So that actually quite upsets me because my language is quite un-PC and I'm a little bit rough around the edges. I feel like judging someone on that rather than their actual behavior, rather than the true expression of values, which is where someone puts their time and their money and sometimes actually, dangerous situations. I think that is a bit insulting. And I feel like we're better off judging character by knowing people and knowing their actual behavior rather than judging on this sort of PC language bullshit that's become the norm. That is not what defines virtue. And often there's a lot of shadow involved because victimhood is a new kind of virtue. And I'm taking quite a strong stance for responsibility and strength on mental, emotional, physical levels. So, on all levels. So I think that as soon as you get some success, particularly in Britain, there's going to be haters as well, right? There's going to be people who are, that happens in Scotland.
Tall poppy syndrome.
Knocking it, yeah, tall poppy syndrome, knocking people down. So there's a degree of that. But I think the main misunderstanding is just I'm some uber yang warrior. And if they'd have seen me, face painting and skipping around with this 6-year-old the other day in the fields of Buddhafield, they'd probably have a different opinion.
So you mentioned the word virtue there. What do you think of the virtues are? What do they need to be?
What are the classical virtues? I mean, all cultures agree, basically. There aren't more than 12, and some would say 7. I think they're universal.
For you.
My own personal values or virtues? What do you mean?
What's your code, we say?
I'm deeply committed to that which is true, exploring it, investigating it, sharing it, teaching it, challenging lies and bullshit, whether they be from the political left or the right, whether they be from the new age or whatever. And I think that's what most gets me in trouble, actually. I was watching Chernobyl, great TV show, and resonance for me with my Ukraine connection. And he says, every time we lie, we make a debt to the truth. And it's a beautiful speech by the lead scientist involved. And that really resonated with me. So I think there's a real key value there. I think the traditional masculine value of strength and resilience taken in a broad way, not just physically or some kind of dominance, but really could be the strength to be vulnerable or to have a hard conversation or whatever, has always been a key value of mine. I value playfulness and humor above almost all else. And if I see in my mind a really good joke comes up, even if I know it's going to get me in trouble or some people are going to be upset, it's just, it's too tempting. It's just because really for me, humor is that which sets us free, and there's a divine quality to humor, and without humor, we're all screwed. So for me, humor isn't just like an entertaining thing; it's much deeper than that. So that's a pretty key one for me.
Do you like Frankie Boyle, for example?
I do like Frankie Boyle, even though he's a lefty. So yes, I do like Frankie Boyle. He is, and I do value intelligence, and I do value. I feel like both people on both sides politically have a piece of the truth, and Frankie I like a lot, and he gets away with a lot, and I feel like the move against comedians in the modern world, which we do see, like most comedians won't play universities anymore. Think about that. Universities, seat of knowledge. Comedians, the jester has always been the one that spoke truth to power to the king, and it used to be that was the right, now it's the left. And the lack of humor in certain circles is always a sign of totalitarianism, whether it be the right or the left or new age or whatever, the guru that can't take the humor. So humor not only is a sign of that which is healthy, I would say, but keeps us healthy. And the move against comedy, I think, is not a small thing. That's quite a profoundly disturbing thing.
So that and where can you find? Because I know some people I know are quite very serious about embodiment. What would be your advice?
Americans, is that what you mean?
I didn't say that. You said that.
You would never say that.
I get you to say that.
I love America, but we are just in the British Isles, including Scotland Island, and our Australian and New Zealand listeners, who are quite a strong listener base, actually, we are just funnier than them. I'm sorry. we are just funnier. It's true, we're funnier. Okay. But I remember being in bars in America when I was a student, just like a table of women would be like, "You're hilarious," and I'd be like, "I am like average funny for a British guy." So yeah, I think embodiment takes itself quite seriously, both with the Asian roots.
Yeah.
You do get the odd funny Japanese sensei, but not that many. Yeah. And the American sort of takeover. So between those two cultures, I feel like if Australia was leading the world in embodiment, and most embodiment teachers are Australian or New Zealander or South African, or, there's a bunch of countries that really value humor. They tend to be quite Anglo countries. There's others. Then I think it would look very different. And even when I work in Russia, people said, "Oh, you shouldn't make jokes. People won't take you seriously." And I said, "That's fine."
That's fine. Don't take you seriously.
The biggest laugh I ever got in Russia was people came in from the cold, and they looked sort of wet and cold after lunch. And I said, "You look like a dying Napoleonic army." And the room just cracked up. They like dark humor there. So
yeah, I think that's often a myth. It's, I worked in Germany for a long time.
Yeah.
There's another myth that I think maybe it's a British myth. Germans have no sense of humor. But as long as you do the bit about establishing your authority and your expertise, and you give them some good stuff,
yeah,
be as funny as you like.
I feel like nearly all world nations have humor. It's part of being human, but the Anglo nations, it's a higher value. There's a higher value, particularly to sort of clever verbal humor. I don't know. I feel like that can be missing from the embodiment world sometimes. But there's also like the improv scene and others, colleagues we have that, Rachel and Liz and people like that who are super into it.
Okay, coming to our last few questions here. How impactful can embodiment be in transforming? Oh, it's a bit serious, this one, after humor.
Okay, let's try it. Transforming the world.
Being transforming toxic dynamics within the dysfunctional organization systems.
Long words here.
So I guess embodiment being impactful in, I guess there's a lot of inbuilt assumptions in this question that corporations, organization systems are toxic, I guess. Maybe that's not.
Well, let's broaden it out. So just in terms of embodiment saving the world. So I feel like, first of all, whatever field we're in, we could have some humility to say it's probably not the only piece of the pie, right? And embodiment, I think, is a key piece, because if we feel ourselves, we can feel others, we can feel the environment. That rehumanizing of the world is vital, and violence is the result of not doing that. We live in a psychopathic world without that. So that piece is the ethical heart from Paul Linden and Strozzi and others that, stand on their shoulders that have said that is key. So that is, I think, a key piece, though I'm also aware we all tend to overestimate the importance of our own field. If we look at it integrally, there's structures and systems as well, right? If people are rewarded in a company on being assholes, then, is it really going to help to do centering? So it's like if they're hired and fired on that, So I think we do need to look at the bigger picture politically, systemically, organizationally, wherever we're working, culturally, and not just think that, centering is going to do it and all we need is more yoga or meditation. That would be naive at best and arrogant at worst. There, a serious answer. I managed it.
Wow.
Pat on my own back.
It just made me think, though, about the sort of polarization that's there's so much polarization, as you say, that that humor is difficult to find the humor or to be humorous or to have humor accepted. That polarization between left and right, where it's almost impossible to push to the extremes. Yeah,
that's really disturbing trend, isn't it? And if people can't get the dick jokes anymore, it's a real issue. And no, it's really tricky. I lost a member of staff on this recently, just didn't have a sense of humor around various stuff. And it wasn't cruel or nasty or abusive. It wasn't, she wasn't being attacked in any way personally. But people can be really, that is a trend in the modern world, and the driven to extremes and being seen as on an extreme. I find it utterly ludicrous when people think I'm alt-right, or they think I'm, or sometimes it's the opposite. They think I'm far left. But it's like being seen as an extreme, having to put people in one of those two boxes, the divisiveness there. And I think, one thing that gives me hope, like I sat down with a yoga teacher in Buddhafield who'd heard some bad things about me from a student, but she was really solid yoga teacher, and she sat down with me and we had breakfast, and she just felt into her own body, and she was like, oh, you're not so bad. I can see that you're a decent human being. And then we were able to connect and talk. So I think it is one of the ways in which we can it's not the only way, but it's one of the ways that we can overcome some of the divisiveness we see.
So connect and talk with people in the real world.
The real world, and by relating to people through embodied empathy rather than through a frame of you are a this. Like you're a Scottish, or you're a white straight man, or you're a whatever, a leftist, you're a, because they're all conceptual frames. And sometimes I'm pretty sure there are people on all extremes that are just too far gone, and that's the only way they can see the world is through those ideological, they're not even filters, they're reality replacements, So when that is the case, walking away is the best policy. And I found when I've been attacked, 9 times out of 10, it will be a sort of misunderstanding, and I can reach out to people and have a conversation. And 1 time out of 10, it's just there isn't good faith, and there's a sort of ideologically defended position that's just unsurmountable.
I mean, you were talking about that a little bit with Diane Hamilton.
Mm-hmm. She's very good on these issues, really, really good on these issues, really sophisticated take on things like diversity issues.
Okay, last couple of questions. Retreats, moments you wish you could have again or try a new way.
Well, I do have this fantasy that I'd go back to secondary school as a psychologically sophisticated martial artist and just systematically break every one of my teachers one by one. And I should probably take this to a therapist, not thousands of people on the internet. But I think certainly some of those difficult teenage years would be quite interesting to do again in a slightly more skilled way, should we say. Is that what you meant, or did I just go into the dark pit there?
I get, what is it that you found? I mean, I guess that's an interesting question, maybe. What is it you found about education that was so difficult or traumatic and...
Well, I mean, this is the basis of my whole career is really having a difficult time with education, both because it was easy, I was cognitively very clever, but also because of many of the teachers I was with weren't kind and weren't holistic, for want of a better word. And I feel like having a very painful experience of education was one of the things that's really led me to be in that field and to try and do something wiser and kinder. And I stumble with that, but that's one of the sort of drivers there, for me, if we're going to get analytical.
What would a more holistic education system look like?
One that just takes into account multiple intelligences. I mean, there's been attempts at this, like Steiner schools and Montessori and various things. And I feel like now it's just coming into its own. And I have this, this really... it's going to be very interesting when a lot of this technology comes together. Like if people listen to John Vervaeke podcast, which isn't out yet, but will be by the time this is out. It's weird talking in real time and recorded time. Anyway, like I have this vision that there'll be centers where there's been, real mind body research that's been done and it's integrated, and people are offered various programs of transformation as a normal thing, in the same way as I went to the gym today and they're like, okay, you can have this protein shake and have a personal trainer and do this, like that fully integrated on an emotional, psychological, spiritual level. That technology is only just starting to happen and just starting to come together, and the embodiment is only just one piece of that. So it's that for me would be the dream. There would be an education that took into account the whole human being and developed the whole human being.
What excites you then about the potential of technology? Because we may kind of make it out to be the demon in all this.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be. Like I was talking to my friend Ewan today about some great new technologies that exist, one which measures your breathing, and he was talking about the Muse headband, that I've been playing with Muse, and there's an upgrade apparently now that he was talking about getting, and there's a quantified self people. I think there's a danger of disembodiment and objectification within that. But I feel like there's some, how cool would it be if you had a monitor and it'd be like, oh, my dopamine levels are a bit low and my cortisol's a bit high, and a little light goes off. It says maybe it's time for a walk in the park and a sandwich or something, or, I think there could be, and that's not so far off, that technology. How cool would it be if it was just normal, to normal skills that would take the basic sort of interoceptive skills that let people know when they're stressed. That takes time to develop. You see this in martial artists right now. People come to the dojo and on day one, they don't even know they're stressed, let alone be able to regulate it. But, we can speed a lot of those processes up, and there's risks in that. So I recorded a podcast on the future of embodiment where I talk a bit more about this, but it's an interesting one. I'm not quite sure what I think yet.
So still formulating your thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not.
What would be the two? What would be, or maybe there's some incompatible positions there. You're trying to sort of holding at the same time.
Well, there's a position, something like interoception is what we're trying to develop, but by developing technology which makes that exteriorly more available, one could actually atrophy those interoceptive skills. So that's the potential risk or the tension there.
I think we're an hour and a quarter, just about.
We're in. Blimey, I've got a mentee call in 15 minutes.
I think the last question that I'd end with is, now that you're reaching this grand age of 40.
No longer the enfant terrible of embodiment.
What would be your 3 pieces of wisdom that you pass on to your 16-year-old self?
My 16-year-old self. Oh, wow. I was a mess at that point. He wouldn't listen. There'd be no point.
Okay. What would be pieces of wisdom that you pass on then? What have I learnt? Yeah. What have I so far? You had to strip it down. You know, you are who's that Confucius, you know, Confucius wandering past the garden.
I'd just try and be, he wasn't very happy back then, so I'd just try and be kind to him, I think. And I know he'd ignore everything I say. And there's a girl in particular I'd given some advice on, and I'd tell him to watch out for the drink and drugs, but he wouldn't listen. And, I don't know. Everything I've done has led me here today. You know, I don't want to get Battlestar Galactica on this, but it's, those kind of games trying to change the past, I think, send you crazy. I think I'd just be a bit kinder, encourage him to be a bit kinder to himself. It's sad we talk about these complicated things, but maybe that's a good place to end the interview, because that's what it all comes down to, really, doesn't it?
Kindness. Being kind and being aware. If you achieve that, you've achieved something.
Boom.
Episode 200. That was it.
Fucking hell. 200 episodes. Wow. I've definitely learned some stuff along the way. Definitely learned some stuff about interviewing and different guests. It's been something. So thank you to listeners as well, because I would have, if no one was listening, so I think I would have quit doing it. So thank you to everybody out there who has listened, and thank you for the other 198 guests who've been on. So cheers, Neil. Appreciate you standing in today to dive into this.
I enjoyed that.
Thanks for everybody's questions on Facebook too, on the Facebook group. Appreciate those. There's some really good ones there.